All right, guys. This is Ausjdocs episode 2. We have a special guest today. His name is Henry, and he is a plastic set trainee from next year. Plastic training is one of the hardest surgical training, and it's very hard to get into. We'll have a chat with Henry about what is required to get into plastic training and give some tips for people who are interested in plastic surgery pathway. So let's do it. All right, so welcome Henry to this podcast, mate. I was talking to I was talking to Andy about you, and I was saying that you are like one of the 1%.
He was giving me a very colorful intro.
Yeah, I was
Not at all.
hyping you. I was hyping you up, man. You're
I'm
one of those
I'm
people.
sure you're exaggerating.
Mate, so today we're going to talk about how obviously you now got onto the plastic training program, but you work your ass off, obviously. And so last time we met was back in 2018, like you said.
Yeah,
About 4 years ago.
Residence.
Yeah, mate. And what were you then? Were you a JHO or were you an intern? I can't remember.
I was a HMO2, so like
HMO2, so
first
you're
year resident.
JHO. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. But let's start from the beginning, mate. So are you an undergraduate or were you postgraduate med? I can't remember.
So I did undergrad med. So yeah, straight out of high school, Monash, 5 years, and then came out the other end.
Yeah, awesome. And while you're obviously doing medical school, did you always wanted to be a plastic surgeon, or were your interests kind of lied around
I was
that kind
always
of
leaning
surgery?
towards surgery, but it probably wasn't till my final year in med school I did an elective in plastic surgery and thought it was pretty cool. And then ever since then, just decided that I wanted to.
We met in one of those hospital. We did a plastic term together then. Dude, that was tough. For me, it was really tough.
It was a memorable time.
Would you say that was one of the busiest unit in?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it was quite a big shock coming from like my previous hospital, where like the plastics team was made up of interns, one resident, and 2 registrars. And then I go to like this this new hospital with, at the time we had 5 residents and I think like 6 or 7 registrars maybe. Yeah, it was like a massive team, and like with a big team comes just lots of work. It's just like super busy, but no, we had a good team.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, looking back, it was quite fun. I mean, it was also busy as well. But I remember us, like for me, because I was living in around like Melbourne area, I had to get up at like 4 a.m. I think, and then I drove down. And we did like what 6:30 a.m. like ward round or something. Yeah, and then we finished around 7, like almost like 7, wasn't it? Yeah, it was crazy times, wasn't it?
So you had to do an evening round at the end of the day, did you? Or
Yeah, it's pretty common for plastics that we just do
yeah.
not like a full ward round, but a paper round, and then inevitably
okay, yeah.
after the paper round there's like tons of jobs to do stuff.
Oh geez, that's up.
You just have to like wait around and do them. And then I think there was we did have someone always on the evening shift. They come in halfway through the day and then they stay into the evening because of that.
Yeah,
But
I
I think even still, a lot of the day residents still hung behind because it was just that busy.
And that hospital wasn't even a like major tertiary trauma hospital, but we did get a lot of traumas, like hand traumas.
Yeah, so it wasn't like in a city kind of like trauma center for the state, but I think because the catchment included a lot of rural Victoria, like the rural areas, then I think there was just so many things coming in from all over the place.
And obviously it's a great opportunity for people like you who want to actually do plastics and just get exposed.
I think thinking back on it, like when I compare, what I did as a resident back then to a lot of what my residents do now.
Mm.
It's like, oh shit, I can't believe I did a lot of that stuff. Like they would used to just, I think they just used to send me down to ED and just be like, hey, yeah, just do it in ED. And do like, yeah, it's PGY too. And just send down to ED when like, the ED didn't want to stitch something up. Just like, oh, I'll just send my resident. Whereas like nowadays, like, yeah, we don't really do that very much. But I guess maybe that was just because it was so busy.
Exactly. And Henry, what happened after? So we finished that rotation, and after that year, where did you go?
So I stayed at Monash for another year, just doing surgical residency. And so I think my plan for surgical residency was to just try and get as much exposure as I could. And so again, I talked to one of the bosses, actually spoke to the head of unit, the prof, who said, plastics is one of those specialties where you're very collaborative, work a lot of like, other surgical specialties, combined breast surge, head and neck. And you also get, a lot of consults from other surgical teams saying, can you help me close this wound? Can you help me with this? So they said, yeah, just try and get a lot of experience. So I did rotations in obviously plastics, ENT, orthopedics, vascular, gen surg regging for a bit, and ICU. A little bit of neurosurge as well, and a tiny bit of cardiothoracics. And I think I covered urology for like 2 weeks. So it gave me like a pretty good,
For understanding.
pretty good like experience, seeing a bit of what every specialty does. And the other thing was, still told me that yes, I still want to do plastics more than any of these other specialties. ENT was pretty cool actually. But then yeah, after all of that, and then so I did the year I met you in, that was my HMO2 year, and then HMO3 I still did a lot of surgical rotations in gen surg reg and ICU. And then after that I got my first unaccredited job. I was actually at a different hospital.
Right.
And again, it was kind of right place, right time, kind of just happened to get the job. And then I did my first unaccredited year in plastics as a PGY4, so 4th year out of uni. And that was a very tough year, but I think I probably learned, the quickest and the most from that year, being as a first year registrar in a, specialty surgical area. I feel I'd have a lot of imposter syndrome. I'd be, I'm just here. I am just this PGY4, and all these like, other specialties like these ED consultants, these, other surgical consultants and set registrars, like asking me like, oh, what do I do for this? I'd just be like,
exactly.
Man, I'm like, I'm pretty junior, but I guess everyone goes through that when you're a junior registrar.
Yeah, so it's that stepping stone, isn't it, from becoming a resident to a registrar?
Yeah,
that's like one of the hardest actually jobs when you're actually moving over to
thankfully I had a bit of experience doing the gen surg regging job, so you have a bit of experience being on call, but I think I found it very, very jarring suddenly switching to like a subspecialty, and suddenly like you are the you're giving all of this advice, which but quick, made you learn quick.
As a PGY4 unaccredited reg in your first year in plastics, did you feel like you were like reasonably well supported doing that role?
So I think
by the senior regs and the consultants.
Yeah, so that was one of the other things. I think it's part of the plastics culture as well. Maybe also the surgical culture in general, but definitely more so in plastics, where it's definitely you do have support, but it also just feels like you're getting thrown in the deep end. So when you're a gen surg unaccredited like HMO3, you have everyone knows you're very junior, and kind of you have a lot of support. But as a specialty surg registrar, I think the expectation is like a lot more. Suddenly you're the plastics reg. You're not just like the pager holder for the gen surg on call. And the consultants I was very lucky. All of my consultants were very, very nice. But I think for plastics, I can't really speak too much about the other surgical specialties because I haven't been a registrar in the other surgical specialties. But for plastics, a lot of the bosses, they work both public and private. And even if they're on call during the day, doesn't necessarily mean they're in hospital during the day. They've got other commitments outside of hospital. And so I found that to be pretty jarring because like during my gen surge days, it would always be that the on-call consultant was physically in the building and could always just go up to them and talk to them. But plastics, often there would be, doing a private list or private consulting, and you had trouble, they'll just be like, oh yeah, I think you can deal with that. And most of the time it'd be like, okay, all right. And then you'd have to like rely on, I had senior registrars, like accredited registrars, they're at the hospital with me, so then I'd learn a lot from them, after like having a discussion with my consultant who's not on site, and then they just tell me what to do. But I haven't had that much experience in actually doing that. I would rely on the expertise of my accredited registrars who would then teach me like a lot, and I learned really quickly, a lot of like how to do, simple to intermediate traumas, fixing tendons and, doing all these random things, which, I'd never done before, but suddenly it was kind of the expectation that, guess you can sort it out now, you're a registrar.
So just to give everyone a bit of a perspective, so past, like, in order to get into plastic surgery, or people who actually got in from the past offers, so in 2021 they picked 4 trainees to commence in 2022, and like 2021 it was 4, 2023 2. It was just, out of the whole Australia, they only picked from like 2 to 4 people. And Henry,
I think I think that's probably by state actually, because I think there were in 2021 there was 4 trainees who got selected in Victoria. And
gotcha. So it's a statewide.
It's a state-based, but there is like an overarching like nationwide program. So I think the asked to the Australian Society of Plastic Surgeons, they kind of allocate spots per state based on mainly based on, I think, how many previous trainees are in that state who are sitting their fellowship exam. And so, it varies from year to year. Like some years there's
sorry, I was actually looking at New Zealand one. Sorry, so it was actually for Australia. It was actually 18 in 2021, and 2020 was 17.
Yeah. So each state, each state probably has like 3 to 4. I think some states have more than. I think New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, I think have the most, and then the other states have a bit less. But overall, it's about. In 2021, there was 4 Victoria / Tasmania, because they count Tasmania as part of Victoria, who got in for that state. But then nationwide, it's like 17.
But even then, Henry, though, that comparing that to like general surgery, for example, that is like really low. General surgery takes about 80 people, 83, 88. Yeah, 83, 88.
Right? Yeah. But I guess it's like how many people are trying to get on. Like obviously there's more people who want to do gen surge than plastics, but it is still like, it is definitely the biggest bottleneck, and especially like in recent years, how there's been like such an influx of medical students, and then what they've basically done is they've slowly increased the number of unaccredited spots in the state, but the number of accredited positions like to get in hasn't changed at all. And so it's just becoming this bigger and bigger bottleneck of people trying to.
And do you feel as though there are still a lot of unaccredited registrars who's not in the training program trying to get in? They're just trying years and years, there's no real, I guess.
Yeah, so there was introduced a rule actually just 3 years ago that only allowed 3 tries, and then you not allowed anymore, where it used to be like you could do it an unlimited amount of times. And so when I was a medical student, there were, some unaccredited registrars who then, when I was an unaccredited registrar, they were also unaccredited registrars. So they've just been like trying forever to get on. But this year, because they only introduced the 3 strikes rule 3 years ago, this year was the first time that people, have had their 3rd try. Some of them got on, some of them didn't. So I think, there's.
And
pretty
how
tough.
did you, I guess, firstly, when did you start thinking about applying, and how did you actually go about it, especially when they introduced those kind of the rules where you can only try for 3 times? And that's probably another pressure.
Yeah, I think it's, definitely it's an enormous stressor. But I think everyone kind of just had the same approach. They, just delayed their attempts until they were a bit more ready. Whereas like previously, people would apply from like even residency, like people would apply before they were unaccredited registrars just to like have a go. And then, definitely the first year unaccredited registrars, like they would all apply. But because they introduced that the first year I was an unaccredited registrar, I thought, look at these people I'm up against. They've all been doing unaccredited for such a long time. I'm just going to use this year to just find my feet, learn how to become a registrar, but don't worry about applying yet, because I didn't think I had a very good chance that first unaccredited year. And then I applied from my 2nd unaccredited year onwards. That was last year. Got an interview, which was good. Got some experience in that. Didn't get on. And then this year was my 2nd go as a 3rd year unaccredited. So I think most people have just taken the route of, 3 strikes me out. I'll save my goes until I'm, a bit more ready. And then after that, it's just looking at the application process and trying to just figure out what you can do to make yourself the best possible candidate, and then just working on that as you go.
But would you say that on your last year's first attempt at trying to get on the pathway, that you've suddenly learned certain things that you could have done better, and you wouldn't have learned it if you didn't try?
Yes and no. I think, definitely yes and no. I think there's a lot of like minor stuff that you probably don't actually think about, which is like the actual application process itself. They make it super convoluted. You have to go on this random third-party company website and like upload all this evidence of everything you've ever done in your career, like, all of your statements from hospitals saying you've worked such rotations, and all of your research, any articles that you've published, like letters of acceptance, any posters and oral presentations you've done at conferences. You need like confirmation you've actually presented them, and then all these courses that you've done. Basically, I had like hundreds of PDFs of just like things that I'd done, and just making sure that they were all like in order and uploaded. And then the good thing about this third-party company, I guess, is that it saves your application. So the next year you go on, it's kind of already there, which does take a little bit of the stress out of it.
Yeah.
And then there's other things like, it's really, it peeves me a bit that, the initial stages, you have to register your intention to apply before you can actually apply and be eligible to apply. And then you apply and then, do all this stuff. But the intention to apply, which is before you upload all the evidence and all of the CV, it's like, you have to do this hand hygiene module that's specific to, the Royal Australian College of Surgeons. And I know a lot of people who have been caught out because they didn't do the right hand hygiene module, and then they weren't eligible to apply, and then they've just like wasted a whole year. So I think the first application and making sure you get all of those things right was pretty helpful from all of those like kind of logistics and applications point of view. Then the references are another big thing. It's like you have to dig up your references from like consultants that you've worked with 3 years ago. The first time I applied, it was 3 years ago, was when I was a resident. So I was chasing all of these consultants who probably didn't really have much to do with me when I was a resident, because you're just the resident, not the registrar, so they don't pay much attention to you. So that was that was pretty difficult, but thankfully, I had kind of pre-prepared in advance for, I always wanted to do plastic surgery. So I read the regulation guidelines from, pretty early on from internship. And it's like, oh, okay. So if I'm to apply in such and such year, then I would need to make sure I have my references. So when I was a resident, I just tried to ask as many consultants who I got along with, I'm going to apply in a few years' time.
Yeah.
Please remember me. I'll send you my CV with my photo, all those kinds of things to try and make sure that they remember you and give you a solid reference. And yeah, it worked out because I got an interview that first time I applied. And then the interview itself, I think, was again another thing that is good to actually experience.
Yeah.
And then made your next attempt
Is that
a bit more smooth.
Is it a statewide panel interview? Is that right? Or
yeah, so it's it changes a little bit year to year, but for this year and last year, it was all on Zoom, which was again another weird thing. But so there's 3 stations of 30 minutes, and you get 2 consultants per station. But there's a whole range of consultants who interview multiple people, so you're not necessarily getting the same consultants as the next guy.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, and then they just ask you questions for 3 times 30 minutes, and yeah, you just do your best.
Were they consultants that you've known previously, or was there some way of that they matched you so that you don't get the people that you know?
I'm not quite sure how they do it, how they choose and stuff. There was it's to the point where a lot of the unaccredited, because we move around hospitals so much, like every year we go to a new hospital usually, and a lot of these consultants also work in multiple public hospitals.
Yeah,
I think it's inevitable that some people get some consultants that they have worked with before. But I think they do try to minimize it to try and make it fair. But obviously it's someone who's worked 5 years of unaccredited and gone to 5 different hospitals has a bit more of a chance to run into someone they know. So I actually did get interviewed by one of my consultants out of 6.
Yeah, so Henry, we just been talking about obviously the application process, and you touched on a few things there. So can you just walk through the application process just briefly as well? So you said even before applying, you said you need to have an intentions to apply, and there are like certain modules you have to do. And I think you also touched on about getting references, and I think that's part of the CV points that you need to get, right?
Yeah. So the 3 main things for applying is your CV and your references, and then your interview. So I think the weighting is it's roughly like 50% your interview. I think it's maybe a bit less than like 45%, and then like roughly a quarter for your CV and references. So the interview is like quite heavily weighted, which I always thought was weird because
exactly
you work on your CV for like many years, and then your interview is like 90 minutes, which is going to decide the majority of your application. But it's kind of, you just have to just treat it like an exam, the interview, just to like kind of prepare for it and make sure a lot of it comes from your actual job and like actually working and being experienced and having experience and knowing what to do. It's kind of like a lot of the questions that they ask, but I always found that a bit weird. So then your CV is again broken down into a whole bunch of sections. As you'd expect, the main things are like your experience, and they count. The most high thing they count is years as unaccredited registrar. They give you a few points for being a registrar in a different surgical specialty and a resident in plastics. And then it's education, whether you've done a master's or a PhD, and then your research, whether you've got publications, posters, and oral presentations. And then there is another random section which is kind of miscellaneous. It's got things like leadership roles and awards and volunteering work, whether you've participated in a national sport or whether you know another language and have qualifications in that. and I think the other thing is conferences attended and courses that you've done, like your CRISP and your ASSET and your EMST, those kinds of things. So it all accumulates into giving you like a CV score. And then your references is, I think the way that Plastics does it, I think there are a lot of good things and some bad things. It's basically every consultant that you work with currently, and then based off your previous, couple of years, I think it's 3 to 5 from every rotation that you've done. And I think in this way, and then from that pool, so I put down like maybe 30 to 40 references or something like that. And obviously they're not going to ask everyone. So from that pool, and they just choose people to call and give you references. So I think in that way, it's a bit more, you can't just cherry pick your references to give you a 10 out of 10, which I think they do in other surgical specialties, but it is also a lot more stressful for us, I think, because, you don't know who they're going to choose. And, where do you always...
Wait, did you say 30 to 40 references?
Yep. Put down a lot of references. Yeah. A mixture of, so it's every consultant that you work in the current job, and I think most people applying are doing an unaccredited plastics year. And then it's from your previous few years. So it depends on what you were doing, whether you were, doing plastics regging, or, you were doing gen surg regging or some other surgical resident jobs, and you'd have to put like, ortho consultants or gen surg consultants or whatever you had done in the previous few years, but the majority of them are plastics consultants.
But Henry, is it?
Yeah, it just makes it hard because...
Is it possible for them to pick a consultant who you worked with as a resident or an intern as well, if they're gonna randomly pick people?
Yeah, it depends on when you apply. So I think the rules just state that you have to put in references from this year, and then the previous, I think they changed it. I think this year is the previous 2 years, including this year and the previous 2, so 3 years total. But I think before that it was like the previous 3 years. And so it just depends on, you're applying, as your second or third year unaccredited plastics reg, in which case most of your things are plastics.
But what do you think? Obviously, you've gone through all that process and you got in. What was the thing that you think you stand out to be able to get into the plastic training program out of that?
Oh, I can tell you my CV wasn't amazing. I mean, it was okay, but I think my references were definitely better than my CV. They do give you a score, so I know that for sure. My references were better. But so then based off your references and your CV, then they choose who to give the interviews to. So basically it's a combination of those two, and you rank high enough to score yourself an interview or not. And so a lot of people, get cut at that stage. They do the application, put in their CV and references, and then don't quite make it to get an interview. And I think the interview, I can't remember how many people they interviewed, but I think it's roughly like 1 in 3 once you get an interview. So like they will give out 3 times as many interviews as people who will get a spot. And so at that stage, it's like, it is quite a big deal actually. Like, because there's a ton of people applying.
Yeah. So if they were gonna give out 4 training positions that year, then they would have interviewed about 12 people, would you say?
So it was roughly that, I think.
Okay.
It might have been 13 or something, but roughly like 1 in 3, and then that you're like, you have a decent shot now, because before then it's you're competing with every unaccredited in the state, who I don't actually know. I haven't actually counted how many unaccredited positions there are in the state, but there's a lot of them. Definitely like, definitely much more than 12. And then once you get the interview, that because basically once you get an interview, it's because the interview is worth so much. Even there are people who will have better CVs.
It's all even ground from the interview.
Correct. Yeah, because even though there are people who have better CVs and better references than you, if you score 1 point higher in your interview, then it'll basically just nullify that, right? So it's just an even playing field at that point, and then you just have to work on doing the best interview that you can possibly do. And yeah, I'm like, I'll be very straight, like very clear. Like, I'm not good at interviews. It doesn't come naturally to me. I can't really. Very, when I was practicing interviews, I found that I was very robotic, very unnatural when you try and like answer the questions. And to some degree, everyone prepares for these interviews, and you'll no doubt get some interviews that you've interview questions that you've rehearsed. But the trick is like trying to make that sound natural, whereas I just sounded robotic and as if I was reading off a teleprompter. But you practice enough interview stuff, and like you find your weaknesses and try and get better. And I think it is it's very hard unless you know someone who's already gone through it. Like, just even though I'd gone through the interview the year before, because I didn't get enough of a score to get on. Whereas like if you speak to actually people who have gone through and been successful, then I think you'll get a much better idea of like what you need to actually be like in the interview to actually score well. It's very smoke and mirrors, and like you don't really
get to know what's going on. Was there any like was there any like courses and things that you were able to do to prepare for the interview at all?
No, most of the time it's just you just ask your consultancy you're working with, and,
right? Okay.
Can you give me some interview practice? Can you like help me out?
Yeah.
I think there are a few people who get like professional interview coaching, but it'll be given by people who aren't necessarily in the industry, not surgeons, definitely not plastic surgeons,
right?
And people who probably haven't gone through this surgical interview, so they can give you tips on presentation and general stuff, but then specific stuff is always going to be a bit trickier. So I just mainly asked around my consultants and people, set registrars who've already gone through that more recently, to find out what is what's kind of going to be asked and what's going to be expected of me, and trying to prepare my best for that. It is probably, it's definitely like an exam, and it's definitely as stressful, if not more stressful, than an exam. But
it's a high stake interview as well.
Oh, definitely. You've spent your entire career building up to this interview.
Exactly.
And it's worth so much. But I think, you just kind of have to, like with any interview, be collected enough to present the best version of yourself, and then just hope that you get on. But yeah, it's definitely stressful. So I think out of all those three, I think the most natural thing for me was like getting the references, because it's basically, you just go to work, do your job well, and get along with your consultants. And I think that was probably the thing that I found the easiest, and I think my references were probably my best part of my application. Your CV is, it's like your CV. You just have to slowly chip away at it while doing this full-time job, which consumes all of your life, which is fun. It's a bit ridiculous. They expect you to do all this research, all this extracurricular stuff, yet work this job that's
crazy,
pretty demanding. But
were you able to max out your CV points?
So they didn't give me like a specific breakdown of how many points I got. It's scored out of 200. They didn't give me a specific.
Oh, it's a aggregated score. It's not a broken
well,
down
no. So they
score,
first
right?
aggregate it, and then they compare it to every other applicant who goes through the system. So, I don't have a PhD. I don't, have that much in my education section. So I definitely know that I didn't get max points for everything. They do give you a kind of framework in the selection regulations, but I think the way they score it is probably a little bit different to that. That's just my speculation. They didn't actually give me a breakdown. What they give you is actually just a base score, which is relative to everyone else who applied. So I think whoever gets the best CV, even if they don't get 200 out of 200, they'll get the 10.
Yeah.
And then based on percentiles, then you'll get 9. 7, 7.6. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you got, 80% of all the 200 points or 60% of all 200 points. It'll just be based off everyone else who has had the, I think most people's CVs will be pretty similar. Most people, by the time they are a few years into unaccredited, they'll have quite a bit of research and they'll have maxed out their experience points. And most people have a master's, and so in that point, it's pretty similar. But then everyone will have like something that they can add to the table, whether they have like a lot of extracurricular stuff or a PhD, and then suddenly they'll get the top CV points. So I think the CV part is, I mean, it is, it's a lot of work and very difficult, but it's kind of just.
But it's the most predictable, you think, of the three?
Yeah, I think
it's in the application.
I think your CV and references, you definitely have the most control over, I believe. And I think for me, like going to work and getting along with bosses is more natural than going home and working on my research projects and doing all that. So I found that bit easier. They are worth roughly the same, but I think you just have to do both, right, in order to score well enough to get yourself the interview. And then the interview, as I said, it's just intensive preparation and making sure you perform on the day, which is in some ways very unnatural. And
of course,
definitely I felt like I had the least control over.
I feel kind of I find it ridiculous that they even put they give you a point for a PhD. Like, how do you even do a PhD while you're working a plastic unit? That is just nonsense, isn't it? Like
a lot of people just have to take time off.
Yeah, exactly.
So they just plan to.
Some people do a PhD before or during their medicine degree. So that's not really that uncommon.
But that's actually quite new though, mate. When we were at medical school, there wasn't any conjoined program or MD plus PhD kind of courses. That's kind of just came up in about a few years, wasn't it?
Not really. Back when I was, because I did graduate entry medicine, so a lot of my peers were either they came from a previous sort of degree already, and so they were able to do a combined sort of MBBS PhD program, or they could choose to do an extra couple of years of PhD whilst they were in their first internship or second year out of
but I guess the issue is though, like the PhD needs to be plastic specific, right? You can't be just other PhDs, right? So unless you want to.
Does it have to be surgical specific?
So I think I think there's like tiers. So I think plastics based PhD is
higher point.
I think highest. I think it does still count if you have a PhD in something else, but I don't think it counts as many points as a plastics.
So if you have a PhD in chemistry, would that count? Some points?
To be honest, I'll have to go back and read the notes because I just kind of disregarded that section.
Of course, exactly.
I'm not going to have a PhD by the next few months.
It wasn't relevant.
I guess generally speaking, though, unless you know that you are definitely gonna be a plastic surgeon or apply for a plastic surgery, no one's just gonna do a PhD during their med school, even before the med school, isn't it? Because you need to apply for PhD plus MD program. So unless you
have to know,
unless you're dead set on it,
if you were going to do it that way.
Exactly, and that's really really unobtainable, really, to be honest.
So the people who I know who did the PhDs and then got into plastics, I think most of them did it after they'd started working. Then they took some time off, and then during that time they just did full-time PhD and then part-time private assisting to keep earning a bit of money. That's how they did it. But I think still they're definitely in the minority of people who end up getting on.
Exactly.
But, for those that did do it, of the people I know who did a PhD, I think the majority of the people who I know who did a PhD did end up getting on. So
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's a weird one. It's definitely
Yeah.
a big commitment.
Yeah. Henry, so obviously you got on, and I think you are allocated to Victoria, right? Victoria, Tasmania.
Yeah, Victoria, Tasmania,
Mm,
correct. So they just send you. Yeah, so they just so it's traditionally a 5-year program. They're kind of slightly changing it so that it's more of a flexible training.
mm,
You can finish it a bit quicker or a bit later, but roughly 5 years, let's say, and then they'll just send you to different hospitals. Some rotations, most rotations are 6 months, and then some rotations are 12 months. So you'll go to
mm,
this hospital, then this hospital, and this hospital. You got a couple of exams, your first part, and then your fellowship exam, and then just have to pass each rotation based on a lot of work-based
mm,
assessments and things they just need ticked off.
mm,
So that's the next stage for
mm.
me, just getting through that, which
Yeah, it's amazing,
it's
dude. Like,
exciting
it's
for me.
amazing that you got on. And I kind of always thought that you're gonna be on to the training program, to be honest. When I kind of saw you, I don't know, there was some vibe about you where I knew you're gonna get in, which is amazing. But I guess you get to choose or preference different states, right? So you get to choose if you want to be in New South Wales or Victoria, you can do that, but you don't always get
Yeah,
that though.
correct. Yeah. So again, it goes back to it is state-based selection, but with like an overarching Australia-wide selection. So you can only put 2 preferences down when I applied. So I put my first preference being my home state, and then my second preference being the other biggest state in Australia. You don't get to preference like all the states in order, so you only get to preference your first 2, and then after you do your CV, your references, and your interview, and then they will give you they will tally up all the points. They didn't give me the actual rankings nationwide, but they'll tally up all the points and then compare it to everyone in the nation. And then it's basically it's the top, how many spots there are in Australia, like 18 or whatever. They'll just select the top 18, and then they'll look at their preference. So the top 18 nationally will always get on, and then they will look at which state they preferenced, and then they will try and fill the
Remainder.
number of spots in each state based on the top 18s or however many preferences. And most of the times they get it pretty bang on, but I think there's a few people who have to move states to fill that kind of fill all the spots. But then I know a lot of people who they get on to a state that's not their first preference, but then later on in training they can apply to move back. And I think it kind of with the year that they move back, and then I think they just jig the number of spots in each state to try and accommodate for that. So it's not like it's not like you're going to be in that state for 5 years necessarily. And there is an opportunity to come back if you apply and if they accept that.
Gotcha. Right. And Henry, what's I guess what now? So you're going to obviously spend about 5 years in plastic training. Have you thought about subspecializing, or what's your interest in a part of the plastic that interests you?
I think all of plastics is quite interesting to me. I think the thing that drew me to plastics, one of the things that drew me to plastics, is the variety. You can do so many different types of operations, like really small operations or really, really big operations, basically on, most places in the body. I think that's quite cool. There are definitely subspecialty areas that are more and less appealing to me. I think head and neck surgery, like major head and neck reconstructions, I think is really, really, really challenging.
Yeah.
And definitely one that still find interesting, but I think just the sheer complexity, the complication rate, and the kind of quality of life post these head and neck reconstructions is quite a lot to be responsible for. So I think that's probably lower down in my interests, but who knows? I might go through training and then suddenly really like it. once I'm
Yeah, exactly.
in the deep end. But yeah,
I remember being in one of those recons, and like there was, I think like there's two plastic surgeons, one head and neck or ENT,
Mm,
and the plastic
yeah.
bit takes hours, doesn't it? Because you gotta do
Oh,
the
it's
you gotta
hectic.
do the flap and you gotta reconstruct, and it just takes hours and hours. Oh my god, that was crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then the other thing, lifestyle wise, is a lot of these you have to wait for the resection of the cancer to be done
Yeah,
first
exactly.
by
Yeah.
either the ENT or the MACSACS team,
Mm.
and sometimes they, obviously that's very, very complicated surgery. But even if they start first thing in the morning, sometimes we won't get to start our bit until like late afternoon / evening, in which case then we'll finish like midnight or past midnight, and then you just have to wake up the next day and keep going.
That is crazy, man.
So definitely that's the lifestyle that is probably not the most appealing.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, still very, very interesting anatomy, very, very interesting surgery, and very amazing what they
Yeah.
can do.
Mm.
Yeah, but I think all the other areas of plastics still very interesting to me,
Mm.
and haven't really quite thought about post training. I'm
Mm.
just trying to focus on getting through training first. But yeah, roughly 5 years of training, and then most people would do a fellowship, and then after that, start working as a consultant. So I
Mm.
think that's my rough plan
Yeah, amazing.
for the next bit of my life.
Yeah, amazing.
Just try and
Yeah.
learn.
Henry, and other thing that's interesting about you is that, dude, you're like fit. You're like bulk ass. How do you even have time? Just like let the audience know about your Instagram if you're happy with it, handle. And tell us about your, like, how do you do it, man? Like when I look at you, man, you're so fit. Like how do you even find time to go to a gym, or what do you do again? You do calisthenics, so it's called? I wasn't sure what it's called.
Calisthenics.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Yeah,
Yeah,
what's going on with that?
calisthenics. So I think you're exaggerating a little bit
Oh,
here.
no
Like
way, man. No, give us your Instagram handle, and audience can have a look, to see whether I'm
Instagram is henry.chestnut.
Mhm.
And yeah, I do calisthenics. So I did a lot of sport as a kid.
Mm.
Played tennis and did athletics, and I really enjoyed it. And then in university, I started working out a bit more. And then I just found this thing called calisthenics, which is basically just body weight exercises. Got really into it.
Mm.
Learned how to do muscle ups and one arm pull ups and front levers and stuff like that. And then that all started before I became interested in plastics and started working. So I kind of luckily had like a pretty good base foundation where I'd done it for quite a few years before I started working. And then after that, a lot of the time it's just a bit of habit that I've done it for so long that it just something that I enjoy. I think it's important to, if you want to exercise while you're going through training and stuff like that, I think you have to enjoy it. Can't really think of it as like a grind or a chore or something that you're forcing to do when you don't really want it. So luckily, I always enjoyed sports and stuff as a kid, and then it kind of naturally progressed to become more of like a hobby rather than me setting aside time to specifically look after my fitness. It's just like, oh, I enjoy it. Helps me de-stress. It helps me like take my mind off things at work. It's a bit of me time. So I think that's probably how I was still able to keep that going despite having quite a busy job. Yeah, and then one thing led to another, and then just kept going. And then one of my friends one day was like, "Oh, Henry, you should try out for Ninja Warrior."
Yeah, that's crazy, dude.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, maybe. Why not? I put an application in, and then one thing led to another, and then man, I was like on the show.
Oh my
Sweet.
god, amazing. When was this, Henry?
But this is in 2020,
2020. Yeah.
just
Okay.
at the very, very start of COVID. But I have never really like trained specifically for Ninja Warrior, so I didn't really do very well on the show. It was mainly that I just kept fit, and then up until the application process up until you get onto the show is not doing any of the obstacles at all. It's just general fitness stuff. And so I went there and just showed them how fit I was, and they're like, "Oh, you're a doctor, you're a bit fit, let's put you on the show."
Yep.
And obviously I'd never jumped off a mini trampoline and grabbed something, so I fell into the water. It was still quite a fun experience.
Yeah.
And like definitely something I don't regret doing. It is a little bit embarrassing, but
mate, even just getting into the show, you got to be pretty fit to get into one of those shows, right? Because that's like hardcore. That's
I mean, I guess so.
Right.
But that was more just I just do it as a hobby, and then do it as a hobby, enjoy it, just find it as a way to de-stress, and then thankfully it has lots of other benefits besides just de-stressing me and taking my mind off things. Thankfully it is actually good for my health, and good for my fitness, and it's kind of just a bonus rather than something I make my primary like mission to become super fit.
And I think that's important as well. That's an important point where you're working so hard in a demanding job, you do kind of need that de-stress or to avoid burnout, that you need to have that kind of a hobby to keep healthy.
Definitely. Burnout is a massive problem in the medical field, and I think I'm pretty lucky. I after almost 6 years of being a doctor, I don't feel burnt out yet, which is I think quite lucky. I think there are a lot of my colleagues who are going through a bit of burnout, which it's tough, right? It's just super busy, consumes your life, and then I think my secret is probably that I have something that can take my mind off things, de-stress me, and thankfully it stacks up with other things that are important to me, like being healthy and stuff.
Henry, just wait until you become our age, mate. It won't be same, mate. It won't be same. But
I definitely think that as life progresses, like you've got a kid as well, right? So that's
it's handful.
Can't even imagine how busy that would make you.
Oh, mate. Thanks for coming on the show, mate. That's been amazing to listen to your journey, and
no worries,
just
man.
congrats again getting onto one of the hardest training program in Australia.
It's a significant achievement, and you obviously a very humble person from just listening to you over the last hour or so. But I can tell you that you weren't just at the right place at the right time. You did a whole lot of preparation, and
exactly
what you've shared with us has been very insightful. So thank you very much for that. It's just really cool to hear your story and how you got to where you wanted to go, like because you obviously had your heart set on plastics pretty early on in your career, and you just you just put your head down and figure out what it takes to get there, and just slowly but surely work your way to that goal. And that's very what do I say? Can't find the right word, but very praiseworthy.
Thanks, guys.
And everyone just make sure that check out Henry's Instagram. So that's henry.chestnut. His bod is just amazing. So just have a look at it. Guys, thanks guys. Thank you, Andy. Thanks, Henry, for coming on the show. Look, best of luck for everything. You're just an amazing person, and I think you'll do well. You become a plastic surgeon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
All the best, Henry.
Thanks, guys. You too. I really appreciate you.
All right, guys. All right,
inviting me on.
See you guys.
Okay. See you later. Bye.